A city of splendor and strain. 17th century Paris trembled between glory and decay. It was a city where magnificence rose beside misery, where royal ambition brushed against human desperation. Narrow streets reeked of mud, smoke, and perfume. Open drains carried filth past shuttered homes, while the scent of roasting meat and imported spices drifted from nearby markets. Everywhere, sound filled the air. Merchants shouted prices, iron wheels groaned over stone, and church bells tolled warnings of unrest as often as they marked the hours. Carriages clattered past beggars and courtiers alike. Silk sleeves brushed against tattered cloaks. Gold embroidery passed hollow eyes. The Seine flowed steadily through it all, carrying both commerce and corruption. Barges heavy with grain and timber nudged past refuse and dead animals, reminders that life and decay shared the same current. Paris was brilliant, volatile, and hungry, a city poised on the edge of transformation. Welcome to Paris in the 17th century.
On the Ile Louviers, Paris felt raw and unsettled. This low, marshy island near the river lay strewn with timber yards and warehouses. Mud clung thickly to boots, and the air smelled of wet wood, river water, and sweat. Barges crowded the banks, unloading grain, firewood, and stone. Laborers shouted over one another, hauling loads from dawn until dusk. The island was all work and river grit, a place far removed from courtly elegance, yet essential to the city's survival. Nearby, at the Porte Saint-Denis, triumph met the city's dust. The great arch rose above the churn of carts and traders, its carved victories frozen in stone. Soldiers marched beneath it, merchants passed through with wagons creaking under their weight. The arch proclaimed royal glory to all who entered, even as the streets below remained clogged with mud and noise. Here, grandeur did not replace chaos, it loomed above it. At the Hôtel de Ville, Paris displayed its stern civic face. The Renaissance facade dominated the square like a monument to order and authority. Beneath its carved stone, the city's pulse beat hard and uncertain. Messengers hurried across the cobbles clutching sealed decrees. Inside, crowded halls buzzed with disputes. Merchants argued tariffs, magistrates weighed petitions, citizens pressed claims, shouted grievances, and whispered suspicions. Outside, vendors mingled with agitators. Pamphlets changed hands. Voices rose and echoed off stone walls as the Seine's cold wind swept across the square. Here, power felt ceremonial and fragile at once, grand in appearance, yet always threatened by the unrest simmering below. On the Pont Neuf, Paris gathered in all its unruly glory. The wide stone bridge thrummed with life from dawn until nightfall. Vendors hawked fruit, ribbons, and trinkets. Jugglers performed for coins. Barbers shaved customers in open air. Pickpockets slipped through crowds with practiced ease. Horses clattered past nobles dressed in bright silks, while students, laborers, and soldiers jostled for space. Gossip, pamphlets, and rumors passed as quickly as coins. Beneath the bridge's arches, ferrymen shouted over one another as river smells rose thick and sour. It was the city's great crossroads, loud, watchful, alive, where every breath felt charged with possibility and deceit.
At the Palais Royal, Paris revealed its polished mask of power and intrigue. Behind dignified arcades, courtiers traded secrets with careful smiles. Politics unfolded in murmurs and glances. The gardens offered a rare hush. Gravel paths crunched softly beneath measured steps. Trees were clipped into order. Fountains murmured endlessly. Elegance draped itself over tension, concealing ambition beneath refinement. The Luxembourg Palace stood apart from the city's clamor. Commissioned by Queen Marie de' Medici, it rose serene and stately, overlooking gardens shaped by symmetry and calm. Here, statues lined ordered paths. Noble families strolled beneath trimmed hedges, their quiet movements masking courtly schemes and rivalries. The palace was a retreat from Paris, yet never fully escaped its politics. At the Place des Victoires, Paris displayed its triumphs in stone. Merchants, soldiers, and curious onlookers drifted through the open space, footsteps softened by symmetry. The circular square framed the statue of Louis XIV, rising proud above polished facades that echoed royal authority. This was elegance shaped into certainty, an ordered calm meant to quiet the city's restless spirit. Notre Dame towered above the Ile de la Cité, its darkened stone catching the river light like a solemn beacon. Bells shuddered through the streets, vibrating through bone and memory. Inside, incense drifted beneath vaulted shadows. Worshippers murmured prayers, hopes for mercy, fear of damnation, pleas for bread or forgiveness. Faith offered comfort, but also control, binding the city to ritual and order. At the western edge of Paris, the Tuileries gardens stretched outward in long, measured rows. Gravel paths and aligned trees offered Parisians a rare sweep of calm. Beyond them stood the Porte de la Conférence, where the city thinned into open ground. Here, breezes carried dust, conversation, and courtly gossip alike. At the Porte Saint-Bernard, Paris opened fully to the river's rougher currents. Barges pressed in with grain and timber. Crews shouted above the rumble of carts headed for markets and storehouses. Old gates stood weathered but watchful, marking the threshold where crowded streets met the harder labor of the Seine. Parisians lived densely packed. Thousands of families stacked themselves into tall houses that leaned over narrow streets. Upper floors blocked sunlight. Privacy was rare. Noise traveled freely through stairwells and courtyards. The city swelled past 500,000 souls, artisans, clerks, servants, merchants, each moving through a daily press of labor and survival. The poor crowded church steps and bridge corners. Wrapped in rags against damp winds, beggars pleaded for coins or crusts. Children trailed beside them with hollow eyes. Hunger was woven into daily life, present amid both markets and palaces. Winters in 17th century Paris bit harder than today. The Seine often froze solid. Parisians flooded onto the ice with skates, sleds, and makeshift stalls. Fires burned atop the frozen river. Vendors sold wine and roasted chestnuts. For a brief season, hardship turned festive, cold, bright, and fleetingly carefree. Inside a Parisian patisserie, warmth and sweetness reigned. Ovens glowed, sugar and butter filled the air. Tarts, biscuits, and candied fruits drew crowds. Nobles and laborers alike paused for small luxuries. The shop offered a momentary escape, delicate pleasure in a city of noise and hunger. In the Galerie du Palais, booksellers displayed fresh pamphlets and forbidden verses. Haberdashers' stalls shimmered with ribbons and fine cloth. The passage buzzed with bargaining, gossip, and ambition. Parisian life compressed into a single corridor. Politically, France balanced on tension. In 1628, Louis XIII and Cardinal Richelieu ruled in uneasy harmony. Richelieu's sharp strategy guided the king through siege and intrigue. Their alliance held the realm together by will alone. After Richelieu, Cardinal Mazarin governed with calm, deliberate intelligence. Soft-spoken yet resolute, he steered France through war, rebellion, and fragile peace. He shaped the childhood of Louis XIV, teaching him the price of disorder. Louis XIV grew up remembering unrest, Parisian crowds, rebellion, fear. He vowed never to be vulnerable again. As king, he reshaped Paris with sweeping ambition. Old walls were cleared, broad boulevards carved through dense neighborhoods. Squares like the Place des Victoires were imposed upon the city's tangled heart. Triumphal arches rose to glorify royal power. Institutions were founded, armies strengthened. Architects, sculptors, and fountain makers were summoned to impose classical elegance upon chaos. Even as Versailles became the court's center, Paris remained the king's public stage. The city was transformed, disciplined, illuminated by royal will. Under Louis XIV, Paris took on a new identity, brilliant, ordered, unmistakably shaped by the monarch who intended it to reflect his radiance. The royal family formed a constellation of duty and ambition. Brothers served alliances, daughters and nieces maneuvered through influence. Madame de Maintenon exerted quiet, strategic power. Together, they embodied a disciplined dynasty. By the late 17th century, the Tuileries Gardens had been reshaped by Louis XIV and André Le Nôtre into perfect geometry. Broad alleys, clipped hedges, and precise parterres drew Parisians into a landscape of royal symmetry, calm, measured, and meticulously arranged. Paris had changed, but its hunger remained. Splendor and strain still coexisted, bound together by ambition, fear, and resilience. This was 17th century Paris, a city of brilliance and brutality, ceremony and survival, standing forever on the edge of transformation. That's all for this reconstruction of 17th century Paris. Subscribe for more journeys into the past.